Welcome to episode 6.
I've forgotten how to do this. It's been so long.
It's been a week.
Yeah, it's been a whole week and I'm like, no, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Who am I? Who are you?
You're Courtney and I'm Clodagh and we're Kids From Yesterday podcast. Naturally. What are we talking about this week?
So this week we are going to talk about the roots of emo. We've been very busy. We've both been reading a whole book.
Reading a whole book.
And I read the whole book. Clodagh read most of the book.
Yeah, that'll do.
Between us, we have read a whole book on roots of emo, kind of where it came from. And this book was written in 2003.
Yeah.
By a guy called Andy Greenwald. And basically, whenever you look up anything about emo people, he's referenced all the time. And it's literally because there just aren't that many books out there about emo culture or where it came from.
So fun fact, the term emo was coined in 1985. So long before I ever thought...
You were born.
Long before I was even born, but long before I ever thought emo was even a thing. Like, obviously, it's kind of... I always knew it had its roots in punk rock and... the early 90s and the kind of the grunge and new wave, but I didn't realise it was actually coined in 1985.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be like a derogatory term. You know, that band is so emo.
Yeah.
Except the people that made it up don't know what they mean by that.
Does anybody know what emo means?
No.
Do we know what emo means? So a lot of the book was like the first couple of chapters was about what emo is and where it came from, obviously because the book's about emo roots, and then the rest of the book was just about Dashboard Confessional, to be honest. But they were asking the question, like, what does emo mean and can anyone define what it is? And nobody really can define what emo is. It's just this, you get it. If you get it, you get it. I guess.
No, I think so. Like, I mean, some of the, I highlighted a bunch of quotes in the book because we're reading it on Kindle, not that I defaced an actual book.
Yeah.
I would never. But one of the quotes was that they first encountered the term in 1985 when it was a joke, but they define emo as an unnatural attraction to the Smiths that continues after high school and mates with a love of power chords. Which, kind of vague. You can get it. Like, you would think the Smiths were kind of emo. I mean, like, screw Morrissey and his terrible opinions. But back in the day, all the sad kids loved the Smiths.
I absolutely loved them, so yeah.
But there is the whole thing, which is that no one can agree on what it means. There is not now, nor has there ever been, a single major band that admits to being emo, not one. And I fucking love this, because many of our bands that we love now that are like in the third wave of emo, that are like, we're not emo.
Yeah, that's still definitely a thing. And one thing we did find about reading this book in talking to each other is that there's so much foreshadowing for things that were going to happen that they didn't know were going to happen.
Yeah. Now, there's a book we're going to talk about next week where Andy actually wrote the foreword of, and it's like maybe 4 or 5 years after he wrote this book. Have we even named the book yet?
No. The book is called Nothing Feels Good, Punk Rock, Teenagers and Emo.
By Andy Greenwald.
And I think it should be renamed Nothing Feels Good, Punk Rock, Teenagers and Dashboard Confessional, because that's what the majority of this book is about.
But Andy, we still respect the work that you've
done. We do.
We respect your, dedication to recording a piece of history that otherwise may have been lost, because there actually is nothing else out there. To be fair, like, he did some work. Well, what people seem to think is that originally emo was a genre of hardcore punk that was less focused on politics and heavy music and more on personal politics and melody. So it looked to address an issue of personal nature that were being overlooked in the extremely political punk landscape of the Reagan era. So I think an overwhelming thing that we've seen, kind of, if you read articles about it and stuff as well, is that people accredit punk rock and like the strength of the movement to Ronald Reagan and his like policies and stuff, because people were so fucking angry. So I guess it makes sense that from that people gone into bands that were talking about things that they were like within their control. I guess like a lot of punk was like fuck the establishment, fuck the police, fuck whatever. Whereas you have people singing about like, I'm really sad that this girl didn't look at me today. Yeah, that's like, you know, it's personal, and obviously when you're a teenager these things are really fucking huge.
They are. It's the biggest thing in the world when someone doesn't like you back.
I was talking with my friends last night. They were over for some drinks, and many drinks were had. We were talking about teen diaries and how much of a big, huge deal it was to have a crush on somebody.
Oh my god, yeah.
And my friend Danny was talking about like a crush that she'd had and like what she'd written in her diary, and how like reading back in it now she can remember like how intense those feelings were, and how much she believed that was like a big thing. And I was like threatening to go. I think if I had more drinks I would have gone in and started reading bits of my diary, because I remember, and I remember like how angsty it was, and like I remember sitting in bed being like really sad, like writing in my little diary just, you know, how all these like really intense feelings. So it makes sense that if you're feeling this and you can't talk to anybody about it, and then there's like a dude up on the stage being like, you know what, I had this thing too. And you're like, well, you're cool and girls don't like you, or you're cool and like you're having relationship problems. Like that's so relatable. So you can understand how it turned into this, like what we're going to talk about, like our personal politics.
Definitely. Like I actually, looking back into, I remember having a crush on this guy, and I was actually only talking to my friend about it the other day, and he was like a little emo kid from up the road, and I remember she like announced at her birthday party, I can't remember, like her 16th birthday party, that I had a crush on him, and I was ready to like go home, pack my bags and leave the country. But I like, this was like the biggest thing in the world that could have, and it was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me as well. But then having that kind of emo, on the flip side you have the emo music, the boys, the girls, the crushes. It is like a form of a diary for somebody like myself who has absolutely no artistic skill whatsoever. So the lyrics that they were writing and coming up with were so relatable, and even to this day can sometimes be so relatable.
Yeah, and I feel like you don't really lose that, and even if you lose the actual response, you can kind of imagine yourself back in that, like, oh, when I was a teenager I would have loved this, or like when I was a teenager I did feel this, and it's really cool to be able to conjure up those emotions. So then they said that in 2002, emo is just a term used to mean poppy punk with intense fans. And like, that's, I mean, it's still kind of relatable.
It's still, yeah.
If you translate it to now, that's kind of what it is. It's pop punk.
Kind of. There's another actual quote from the band or from the book that says emo means it's an internet band, which again is kind of relatable now, because I feel like a lot of the emo that's the, you know, the third wave of emo are SoundCloud rappers, and it's almost an insult for the likes of, you know, Paramore and My Chem, but you can see how they were considered an internet band because they had that connection online with their fans.
Yeah, and I think the thing that they were saying this is an internet band was that, like, you go, well, have you heard of this band Dashboard Confessional? And other kids would be like, no, and you're like, go download the MP3 players.
Exactly.
MP3 players, MP3 files of like Napster or whatever the fuck, and I think there was like a quote from Chris Grabber at one point from Dashboard Confessional where this is what this whole book is about. I'm really sorry. If you don't care about Dashboard, like,
you will at the end of this episode.
You're going to love him the way we do. But the quote was that kids were coming up to him after his show saying, we're really sorry we didn't buy your music. And he was like, well, no, because all of you were singing along even though you've never seen me before. And he was like, that's incredible. So I think like on that level too, like an internet band is somebody that literally you're able to find without somebody having to make you buy a CD or whatever. Like, kids were finding this stuff from other kids on the other side of the world going, hey, have you heard this band? Or like, you know, you're not relying on the cool kids in school or like your friends or your older siblings or whatever telling you, listen to these people. There was an actual like place for you to find them.
Go and find them. And that's definitely something we spoke about on the pod before, is that we would, you know, you'd find a band and it wasn't just a case of like on Spotify now you go on, you listen to one song and you kind of decide from there whether or not you want to keep listening, whereas at least on me, when I downloaded from the Pirate Bay, don't arrest me, you had to download the whole album.
Yeah.
And you had to, of course there was like, you know, different ways you had to go around the back of the internet to get into the Pirate Bay. You know, I'm a hacker. But you had to download the whole album, and at that point you were just giving it a go. Like, you know, you'd done all that work, you'd waited 17 hours, you'd left the laptop on all night, you had to just listen to the whole album. So I think as well in this book they do speak about how emo is the first generation of people who like find their music online, and that's something we spoke about as well, how we felt we were the first generation, and like even in the second wave of emo, to go and find music online and download it and listen to it then and there. And it's just interesting to see how so much of the stuff, although we kind of knew it, it isn't something that we'd ever verbalized, I guess, about emo, and to see that this is something that had been said already. And then I guess it's just interesting to see how they had spoken about wow, this is what emo's doing now, and it's just like, this was published in 2003, like, oh my god, like you so could only see what was coming.
And like the funny thing is that there's so many things that were mentioned or that were brought up or like that just feel like foreshadowing, because you could apply so much of it to what you were talking about now. So there was a quote about how clean cut pop rockers of the type, like the noughties, doesn't lie in the music at all, it's in the fans. So they were saying that emo isn't a genre, it's far too messy and contentious for that. What the term does signify is a particular relationship between a fan and a band. And I love that, because I'm like, that is like evergreen content when you're talking about emo, because that's, I mean, talk to any kid, read any Tumblr post, like look at any Twitter account, any like fan space, and that's how people feel. And like you could look at somebody and be like, I don't get this, but there are like hundreds of kids who are like, this band saved my life, or these people mean the world to me, or like this is where I go when I feel lonely, or I made all my best friends through this band. And it's like it's so pervasive. And it was in this book as well that there's these groups of kids who like drive around and they listen to Dashboard and The Promise Ring, and that's their lives. And it's really incredibly relatable that this is something that's just continued going since the word go. Like it's wild.
It is. And in this as well, there's the author interviews some Dashboard Confessional fans, it initially through IM, and then they actually go to a Dashboard Confessional show together. And in the conversation, the author asks, you know, is there anything in your life where you have recently, because they were saying how much obviously the lyrics meant to them, and so they were like, is there anything, give me an example of something recently that's happened where you've taken what Chris has said and you've put it into practice. And one of the guys was like, yeah, so I like this girl for like a month, and Chris was like, just go and like tell her you like her. So I like went and told her that I liked her, and I was like, oh my god, this is so teenage cringe, but this is exactly what emo is all about.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like the thing, this was on like page fucking 4, they were like, it's a desire to turn a monologue into a dialogue.
Yes.
And it's literally like somebody talking to you and saying, hey, if you have these feelings, you need to act on them, or like, if you don't, this is what's going to happen to you, you're going to feel like me, and like you should learn from this. And it's like, it is cringy, and it's like, oh god, like I imagine you look back on that and go like, what the fuck. And there was the whole section, there's like towards the end of the book, he kind of looks at MySpace, and he was reading people's MySpaces, and then he said, he was like, this is really creepy because I'm basically reading people's diaries. So he kind of reached out to people, and then he said like one girl was reading or like talking about like 3 different guys that she'd had all these emo feelings about, and like had posted these Dashboard Confessional lyrics as like her like now listening, and then she'd like written about like what love felt like and stuff, and he was like, so do you like ever regret stuff you'd written? And she was like, no. She's like, I don't care like what's happened since, I never regret my feelings. And it was just like a really nice like, yeah, you fucking stand up for yourself, you refuse to feel cringe about that. You might in like 20 years time, or like 10 years time, when you're making a podcast going, oh god, but
the stuff I've done.
The memories. But it's cool that that's also a freedom that this music has given people, that like you can't really get rid of the feelings, and like there is no point in feeling ashamed of the things that you felt. I guess
it's very sweet. And I think as well, like I feel like I came into like the emo sphere, the kind of the growth of emo kind of in the middle of where MySpace was kind of ending. Almost like I never really used it. And I knew when I was like entering into this space of I'm into emo music now, that I was entering something that wasn't at its start, but it wasn't at its end. It was definitely, it was in its peak. But I didn't realize how much, like I had thought that 2007 emo was emo, and anything that kind of had came before that was just the music that emo had kind of stemmed from. And to go back and actually read this, because obviously in 2003 I was like, what, like 10? You know, I wasn't listening to any of this music.
Yeah, I was 9, I think.
And
so.
there's, to be fair, I'm not really listening to this music now because it just doesn't really appeal to me. Obviously there are some standout bands like Weezer and Newfound Glory, Jimmy Eat World, The Used, that like would kind of seep into the modern day emo that I listen to, I guess. Is there any modern day emo anymore?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I feel like that's a separate episode in itself.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about there about like where it's moved to, but I feel like that's how a lot of people who listened to all these bands in 2003 probably feel about our bands. They're probably like,
definitely.
Probably like, ew.
Yeah.
Why? That's not emo. That's
the same
whatever.
way we feel about SoundCloud rappers.
Yeah, or like the kind of the future. Yeah, the people keep sending me like emo rappers and emo like people who are just making stuff on YouTube, and they're like, you should listen to this, or you should like figure out a way to talk about this. So I think we will at some point. We'll make an episode about like where emo is going, because we can't always just look back.
Yeah, I actually, honestly, until a couple of weeks ago, I thought it was dead. It's not.
It's not dead.
Emo will never die.
I feel like
it's going to grow and evolve, but I don't, the same way that punk music has never actually died, there's still pop punk and different,
and punk's heading into a revival right now. Like, it's kind of like hip-hop punk, but it's definitely like, there's bands like Fever 333 who are fucking amazing, but they're like, I don't know how to describe them. Like, they're very much a punk band, and like, because their whole thing is like, fuck the police, fuck all this stuff, but it's from the point of view of like a mixed race guy, and like there's like another black guy in the band, and it's like the violence that they've like encountered, and like the poverty that they've encountered because of their race and stuff. And it's like, it's American centric, but they're bringing like all their shows are called demonstrations, and like they bring this like message of like, you have the power to stop this. But like in the shows, Jason, the singer, he like does a whole thing where he's like, you know, we're not going to accept misogyny, we're not going to accept this shit, like women are really important, and like we need to start like treating each other. And like it's really cool, because he could just stop at like Black Lives Matter, and that would still be incredibly powerful. Yes. But like, he's taking all of this energy and trying to like do, I mean, like, that's the thing about punk, is like a lot of people left those shows not knowing what to do with that. Like, everybody got really riled up, like, yeah, screw this, you know, fuck the establishment. And then they leave, and then they're like, but what is it you want me to do? Whereas I feel like now, you know, we still need punk, and people are still angry, and they need somewhere to go where they can go and like punch the head off each other in a mosh pit. But like, I feel like we're moving towards like actually having some sort of actionable thing that people can do when they're at these shows, which is cool. But I do see definitely there's going to be like another fucking revival where people just kind of talk about the stuff that they need and what they need to do and what you can do. Like, Fever's thing as well is like, when you come, if you come early, they like have like a food drive, and I think they give you like, I don't know, they have like a wristband or something, but they're like bringing like non-perishable food. Like, I know Warped Tour did that every year, like every stop, and like you get to get in early if you brought like 5 items that were non-perishable. But like, Fever do this in every single place that they go to, which I think is really cool. They have a name for the organization, but they've set up like a trust, basically.
That's actually incredible.
Yeah, and like, that's where I can see it going. But like, if you ask people, they'd be like, punk is dead. And like, you would have asked us, is emo dead? And I feel like, you know, the last couple of years there's been so many articles saying like, you know, emo's dead and it's not coming back. And
we know in our hearts that my chem will get back together one day.
We've done a 180 on this. Yeah. We're like, it's never going to happen. And now I'm like, I need it to happen with my whole body.
Yeah. We're going to be on emergency standby. When you see emergency episode Kids from Yesterday, you know that my chem are back.
It'll happen. It won't happen. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it.
But it's interesting to see how, like, I would never have listened to any of these bands that we're talking about now. Like Dashboard, Brand New, Thursday, Hawthorne Heights. I never would have listened to them initially when I was going through, no, I won't say when I was going through my emo phase, because I'm still going through it.
Going through emo puberty.
When I was going through my, you know, during the emo peak, I'm going to say. And it's interesting to see how the bands that I loved at that time had cited bands like, for example, Paramore, our faves. Hayley Williams had cited like Thursday, Jimmy Eat World, Weezer as like some of her favourite bands. And although I never listened to that music, I always thought they were kind of just punk. But it's just, it's interesting to see how they took that emo inspiration, made their own emo band. Like, and the emo bands that are coming up now, or the emo rappers, for example, Lil Peep had cited, you know, Blink-182, Paramore, whoever else as their favourites. And that's something that's always interested to me, to see how my favourite bands then, how they influenced the artists of now.
Yeah, and I guess that's not really a thing you think about when you're
you
younger.
don't.
Well, I had no, you know, you never think about that. It's like anything. Like if I think about books, I'm always really surprised that an author I really like is like, I love this other author. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god, you read too. Like
Yeah.
obviously they do, and like obviously these bands we love have got people that they're really interested in.
Yeah.
But you have these stories of like kids who are like in bands now that were like, I got up on stage with Green Day, or I got up on stage with All Time Low, or I got to sing with whoever, and now I'm in a band, and that like, that's really cool, because you're like, that's such an interesting connection. But this has been going back like forever, and like all these punk bands, like they say, I mean, there was a thing I read and it was like, the joke was that emo started the second Minor Threat broke up.
Yeah.
But all those kids who loved Minor Threat and they loved Jawbreaker, that's where it all stemmed from. So then what Andy reckons is that Sunny Day Real Estate was the start. And like we've made a playlist. If you've heard it, you may not. We have all our playlists up on Spotify. They go up every Thursday. So you could listen to those if you want to. But we put up a whole playlist of all the bands that Andy, well, not all of them, many of the bands.
Many of them, yeah.
That he mentioned in the book, and that generally are deemed to be like the founding fathers of emo. And there's like one really good Sunny Day Real Estate song. So there's like a couple of those bands that I could see myself having listened to, if I were like this age now. Back then,
yes,
I probably would have listened to Sunny Day, and I probably would have listened to The Promise Ring, I think. But that's what he talks about, like The Promise Ring and Sunny Day Real Estate were kind of the openers for a lot of these people. And that's, you know, like Chris Grabber from Dashboard was a fan of these people as well, and like to Andy, Chris was like peak emo. And it's a lot of his stuff is interesting because he does a lot of acoustic stuff. And when you're reading all the pages, like he kind of goes into all this stuff about like he went out on tour with Chris to like a bunch of different Dashboard dates. So he'd watch him perform, and then he'd hang out in the bus with him afterwards. And they'd kind of travel around America, like talking to Chris and getting interviews and sound bites and just kind of learning about what emo is, pretty much. And Chris is like everything that I thought about Pete Wentz back in the day as well. It's like he's holding this incredible sadness in him, and he's, you know, the most important thing to him is like the fans. And there was all these like stories about him like fighting bouncers and stuff for being rude to kids and like freaking out and like saying like, no, this is so important to me, like I've been kicked out of a venue because of how people are treating my fans, and like you cannot do that to these kids if they're so important to me. Which I thought was wild. I honestly didn't think anybody gave a shit that much at all, but like apparently he was like, he kept like everything people gave him. So if they wrote him stuff or if they gave him things, he'd keep them, and he's like, well, it's, you know, this means something to me.
That's very sweet.
Like it was really sweet, but it was like what all the things that we talked about in that episode. We talked about Pete Wentz like being a fucking icon for mental health stuff. Like Chris was also that kind of sad guy who was like keeping himself in this really unhealthy mindset just so that people didn't feel alone, which I thought was really beautiful. But also really unhealthy. Like, don't do that. No. please don't do that for anybody. That's really detrimental. But like Andy's descriptions of how like, you know, Chris would be fine, he'd be fine, and he'd go out on stage and it'd be like he like uncorked all his feelings and he'd pour them all out, and then he'd get off stage and he'd bottle them all up again. And it was like he was just constantly like letting off steam every night where he was trying to get in the headspace. And then he said something about like some of the songs that kind of get him to that place of sadness. He couldn't, like if he was happy that day, he couldn't access that space, and that really scared him. And I just can't imagine
That's really interesting.
I can't imagine being in that sort of place. I mean, like, I know that's like a creative thing that people talk about, definitely. And like further generations of musicians have talked about this, and like writers do it, and people who make any kind of art say kind of like, well, when I'm sad, that's when I create the best, and then when I'm happy, I can't do that. When that's not true. Like, you don't have to suffer for your art. But it's amazing to me that this is such a pervasive thing in emo music.
Definitely. I can see how, like, I know myself as well. Like, when I write, I go through different spaces, and it's like a massive wave, and sometimes I'm in a good mood and I can do it, and sometimes I'm in a bad mood and I can't, and whatever, and you know, sadness, happiness, all those kind of different things. And I can see how that he could get into that space, for sure.
Like, I've done it myself.
Yeah.
Like, I've believed for a really long time that I had to be unhappy to write. Like, you know, if I go through like a period of depression, I'm like, clearly I just need to write something.
Yeah.
And I need to not feel happy. Whereas I've taught myself over the years, like, that's not okay. And I can write at any time now. I just have to be like inspired as opposed to actually feeling sad, or like feeling like I need to feel a certain way to write something. And I think that's about like a fear of accessing emotions or not being able to access emotions. Like, I think there's probably a whole psychology episode we could do 100%. About like how people think in that way. I just did think that was really, really interesting.
That's definitely a point for science bitch. Another thing that's in this amazing book, there was a whole chapter on Weezer.
Yes.
The chapter's called The Curious Case of Weezer. It's about what a kind of literally the quote, mop top bespectacled dork named Rivers Cuomo was climbing the charts with a song about his favourite sweater. So Weezer broke big in 1994.
The year I was born.
The year you were born. And I never really thought of Weezer as an emo band until recently. And obviously the bands like Paramore, shock, they cited Weezer as one of their favourites, and I always seen them on, you know, festival bills and stuff like that around, you know, festivals that would obviously have emo bands playing at them, Reading and Leeds, Vans Warped Tour, whatever. But it's interesting to see how he, like, the chapter itself is called The Curious Case of Weezer, and I actually consumed this in like, I just like, oh my god, I was just shocked by what I had read in a way, which is why I haven't highlighted anything from that chapter. It basically goes on to talk about, so was it their first album, Pinkerton?
Yeah.
So Pinkerton, basically how it was, he's just ashamed of it and ashamed of the feelings that he was having, and that was something that Courtney, you were talking about, and how you shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we go back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about, like, there is no point in you feeling embarrassment, but the whole quote from it was that he refused to play any of the album songs in the reunion tour because he dismissed Pinkerton as ugly and embarrassing. And it's, like, obviously, you know, I feel like at some point people can move on from, like, an aesthetic they don't like. We've talked before about bands refusing to play songs that they feel haven't aged well on tour anymore, and, like, that's totally valid, but it was like he just couldn't stand the idea of lots of people hearing his feelings and relating to them. Like, I don't know what he was thinking would happen, like, when you release songs into the world, like they become they're owned by the people that hear them, I guess. And maybe he just didn't feel like they were the things he wanted to say anymore, but I just thought that was really interesting that he just and he couldn't cope with it, really.
It's apparently as well Green Day own the masters for Pinkerton, which is bizarre. It's really weird how many times Billy Joe is mentioned in that book as well. Like, he's always hanging around, like, the eaves. But there's like, no actual chapter on Green Day. No, and it was because he just didn't consider Green Day to be, like, because Green Day are kind of punk, so... They are kind of punk, but I guess I think the American Idiot album was, like, emo. Yeah, but, like, it definitely, it's 24th century. Yet. It hadn't happened yet. This is it. Yeah, like, it literally, like, they maybe... If this book was written a few years later... If only they'd known. If only... But it is wild that, like, Billy Joe kept being mentioned, and, like, he was always there in the eaves, like, hanging out with all these bands and stuff. Like, these are people that he was hanging around. Like, this book came out only 3 years before American Idiot. Yeah. And 3 years before My Chem. Oh my god. 4 years before Panic at the Disco. I'm looking at that in kind of context. So what was 3 years ago? 2016. Yeah. Like, I think when we look back on... And when I look back on kind of emo and whatever, I always thought, like, Sum 41, their music was released, you know, probably early 2000s, and I was listening to them late, and I was like, oh god, these songs are ancient. And looking back, it's like, oh, 5 years, that's not actually that long ago. Like, most of my favourite songs were written in 2007, so yeah, and we're now living in 2019. 12 years later. Yeah. Wow. I refuse to grow up.
It's wild. One of the other chapters I really liked was the one about who are the emo kids.
Yeah.
And I loved this again because a lot of stuff in it is kind of salient for today. And so they said that emo is inherently inclusive. They talked about how, like, with the internet, teenagers had the ultimate emo tool, so they could trade, access, and share music, ideas, news, feelings, and support. And, like, I feel like that's kind of how the internet has evolved now. But this book was written before Twitter. Like, it's before the landscape of how
Tumblr.
music, and like before all of these things that are inherently seen as like emo. So, like, there was no MySpace, there was nothing. There was like forums and stuff, and that's how people shared stuff. So there was literally like websites called like emo.com and stuff. Don't go on emo.com. That is
it's not what it is anymore.
No. Do not look up emo.com, please. That has been a
you
PSA.
know we're all gonna look it up.
Well, enjoy your emo porn.
Really?
I've made that mistake before.
There is, okay, so we're definitely gonna do an episode on emo culture. Is there a genre of emo porn?
Yes, Clodagh.
Oh my god.
Yeah, darling. My poor sweet summer child.
Oh, I'm shocked.
She's actually like, I feel like I've just hurt her in some way.
Goth porn.
Yeah, no, this is like, oh no, we'll talk about this when we do our emo culture.
I know what I'm doing later.
You're in my house, Clodagh. But yeah, that's a PSA. Do not go on emo.com, thank you. But there were websites similar to this.
I'm shocked. I still can't get over it. The Converse stay on.
God.
Oh my god.
Well, there were websites like emo.com but aren't emo.com, called like soemo.co.uk, and it was just like forums where people talk about their favorite bands, and like it was like a whole thing where people would put up like photos of themselves, and it was like early emo dating. So you put a picture of yourself, and like it's like this particular website, soemo.com, they have like emo guys, and it's like photos of dudes, and
wow,
like
I feel like I've seen every single one of these photos at some point before.
It's just a sea of guys with like all their hair is the same, and they're all from the same angle, but they just take emo photos and then they put up their names, and you could rate them, which I think is really terrible. Don't do that to people, thank you. But it was like early like Tinder, I guess, but just for emos. They talked about how emo was once a subculture dominated by regionality, and I think that was really important as well, that like they kind of associated emo with being like, you know, East Coast kids like this music and West Coast kids like this, and it was all like very much where you came from is where the kind of music you listen to, whereas we don't have that problem anymore. Like if a tiny Japanese band wants to like start playing music, like you'll hear about it from somebody, or you'll see it somewhere, or it'll appear in an ad for you or whatever. Like you don't have that problem anymore. So they said it's now something completely new and unexplored. It's a national subculture dominated and defined by those too young to have their voices heard but savvy enough to make their presence felt. And I feel like that is still relevant. That is still very much a thing. Like you think about who goes to those shows. Like there's us, the aging emo, geriatric crowd who hang out in like the balcony or the bar. And then like you still have all these like 15, 16-year-olds who are there to just
front row. Yeah,
but they're there to like be heard and be seen. And I think that's really cool. That's still a thing. One
of my favorite lines in that chapter of Who Are the Emo Kids is teenagers were given eyeballs so they could roll them. And they were given towns and schools and lives so they could complain about them. I was like, oh my god, this is so perfectly emo.
But like that's that whole meme, isn't it? It's like, you know, I hate this town.
Like I hate this town. It's so washed up.
I mean, yeah.
Friends don't give a fuck.
And the idea that like, oh, I hate my hometown, or like I hate everybody here and I don't want to live here anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that is the pinnacle of emo, I think. Like,
yes.
That's
the joke, the running joke.
Yeah. Do you like emo music? Are you pop punk? Do you hate your hometown?
Yeah.
It's so washed up.
As well, there is a piece in this book that talks about 17 magazine running a 2-page pull-out spread doubled as an emo how-to guide. So detailing how girls should wear vintage clothes, guys should wear v-neck sweaters, copies of arty books such as Salinger, and that's, again, like looking back at that's kind of like a Weezer
Yeah.
I guess, look of emo, because definitely it wouldn't be vintage clothes and berets and stuff like that now, or even in 2007 if you were to write a how-to emo guide,
Which I'm sure exists.
I'm sure that was definitely a thing in Kiss magazine at one point.
So there was another bit where they talked about like Jimmy Eat World, and I shamefully never realised there was a guy in Jimmy Eat World called Jim.
I didn't know that either till we read this
That-
book.
So he said that there's always a faction of people that want to have their favourite band in a little box in the basement where it's theirs and no one else's.
Yeah.
And you can see that too. Like when like even now you hear like the amount of people who are really upset by Panic at the Disco being in the charts, or like doing I say Panic at the Disco, Brendan doing a song with Taylor Swift and stuff, like the amount of like backlash that got, where it's like we fucking sold out. And that is still a thing. Like Mark Hoppus and Alex Gaskarth started a side piece, and the amount, like all the people under Alex Gaskarth's post about it are like, oh my god, I love this is so cool, you're so great. And all the people under Mark Hoppus's thing is like, how could you, is there any further way you could sell out? This is so shit, what's wrong with you, like this is not the band I love and stuff. So there is still that like real protective thing of like some people want Blink to be theirs and some people are okay with it, but I feel like at its core, the kids who love emo music, just that's theirs. And I suppose if you feel alone a lot, or you feel like there aren't many people that understand you, and this band comes along and it does, and then suddenly like the people who didn't get you are like, I love this band. I imagine like I can remember feeling really shitty about that, like that, but like I listened to this because you didn't understand me, or because you made me feel shit, and now you're taking this thing that's mine
from me. Yeah, it's like when, you know, people in school are all of a sudden, oh, Paramore gigs or my chem gigs or whatever, and you're like, but that's my thing.
I loved this.
Yeah.
One of my other favourite chapters from the whole book was Sad Girl Stories, Women and Emo. Yes. And if you've listened to our episode on misogyny, that was episode 4. Yeah. We talked a lot about like how exclusionary the whole genre is to women. Yes. So they talked a lot to Jessica Hopper about how the monotony of the label's gender perspective can be overwhelming, and it was very much like an old dude thing. And like the concept of gender and like stuff is quite outdated. Like we've moved on. Like one of the good things about emo now is we've moved on an awful lot in terms of like sexuality and gender and stuff, which is great. So they talked to a guy from New Found Glory and said that no girl has ever come up to us and said, hey you guys, we want to say what we have to say with our own songs. Our song's about relationships, but anyone can relate to it. Even though we might say girl in the song, girls come up to us and say that they've had the same problems with their boyfriends and put it into their own perspective. And that was a quote later on. They had an actual teenage girl say that, oh well, even though they're saying she, I just changed it in my head to he.
Which is something I feel like I did a lot as well. Yeah. But that's out of lack of visibility of women in emo and the female perspective. Yeah. But there's another part of the book where the Dashboard Confessional fans are saying, oh, women don't get emo music because it's not for them, it's about them. Like, they can go listen to Fiona Apple or whatever.
Yeah, and like Fiona Apple, if you've never heard of her, I think Paper Bag is like one of her most famous songs, but she's kind of like compared to Tori Amos and Alanis Morissette. Yeah. So, I mean, she's cool, but she's not emo. No. And I do remember listening to her a little bit when I was probably a teenager as well, but I just didn't feel that connection. Yeah. Like the stuff that I wanted people to sing about that related to my experiences were the stuff that these dudes were singing about, and there just weren't any girls at the time, and even still now really, that were doing that. So I do want to, at some point we're going to do an episode where we talk about all the girls that are in the scene now and that have been in the scene in general. So we want to do like a whole episode where we talk about what there is out there and what they are singing about, because I feel like that kind of gets overlooked too, that they're not really in magazines and stuff, or if they're like, well, we featured Hey Violet, so why would we do anything else? So there is kind of that too a little bit, but this was a really cool chapter to read. Did you have anything else from that chapter that you read?
I think that again, that chapter was really interesting in the sense that it was kind of saying everything that we had thought. And it's interesting, again, to see how this was 2003 emo, whereas we were more so speaking about 2007 emo, the peak. One of my favourite parts of that chapter is a quote that says, "I think a girl emo band is far overdue," and I was just screaming at the book. I was like, oh my god, you have no idea what's to come. I was just thinking about Paramore and Hey Monday and Tonight Alive and all these other bands. I guess Paramore being the most. How many times do we mention Paramore?
I
Now?
don't
Honestly,
know.
take
It's
a shot
yeah.
every time we say Paramore.
I'm gonna do that.
Yeah. And as well as that, the book kind of talks about how like the women are making do with changing it from he to she or whatever in their head. But there's also, I guess, the thing that the men are like, oh no, this is not, not for women. We wouldn't understand a woman's perspective if she was to sing, because they don't have to make do the way that we do. Because,
yeah, and I feel like that's in so many things. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't matter what it is. If it's art, if it's books, if it's films, people are like, well, I can't relate to female experiences. And you're like, dude, we had to do this our whole lives.
Yeah.
Our whole lives is us having to find men funny or find them interesting or find their experiences like relevant to ours, because there were none. And then things that are for women like chick lit or like chick flicks or like all girl bands are kind of like looked down upon. It's like, oh, you're just like feminist bullshit or whatever. And it's because it's like, that's for women and that's for me, and people don't make the effort to try hear it. And then I mean, we're kind of delving back into that same episode that we did a few weeks ago, but it is really interesting that this has been such a pervasive part of it. And it's all because it came straight out of punk and straight out of a scene that was very male dominated. And it's just interesting to see that this is like things that we were talking about as a present day thing. That were there in the past too.
It does say as well that the Jessica Hopper, again, who's somebody who's written a lot about emo music and I guess misogyny in emo music, she says that ever since emo music was stripped of its politics, it keeps women on a pedestal or on our backs. It regulates us to the role of a muse or a heartbreaker, an object of either misery or desire. Emo just builds up at the cathedral of main pain and then celebrates this validation. Which, I was reading this and I was like, oh my god, that sentence is the synopsis of that entire episode we done.
Yeah.
It's literally like, we are on a pedestal and we are a muse and we are amazing, or we're that bitch who won't sleep with you.
Yeah. Like that, I found the quote from the kid that they were talking to, the dash. I mean, these were actual kids. These are like 15, 16 and 17-year-olds. Who were like, they hung around together. They all liked these bands together. They went out driving in their cars in the evening, and then they went to shows, and they like really respected Chris, and they thought he was amazing, and like they were real like just like protective over Dashboard. And it was like nice that like 4 guys were connecting in this emotional way. Yeah. When they're that age, when like, I mean, you could say a lot about like, how that's only changed in the last couple of years, that it's actually okay for guys to do that, because it was frowned upon and they were like seen as not conforming basically. But one of them said, not to be sexist, but in a way you want to have companionship in music, the bond between another male that you can relate to. I don't think it could be such a strong connection if it was a girl. And it's just like, oh man,
we'll go fuck ourselves though.
But it's just, it's hard hearing that and seeing it and going like, this was such a needed movement. Like, kids needed this. People needed to hear their feelings be reflected back to them. And it's hard to read that now and go like, people still think like this and people still act like this when it comes to music, and that still like is very slowly changing. We're years behind where we should be in terms of like gender equality and gender understanding and like comprehension of everything beyond a binary basically. And it's horrible to read it and know that that's the same thing that people think now.
It's like, looking back, it's kind of bizarre to think that I was listening to these songs and I was relating to them, and there was that whole idea of them versus us, that kind of internalized misogyny, and you're listening to these songs, and I don't really, obviously listening to music like that now I can see the problem, but I couldn't then. And even in 2003, again, can't believe this book was written in 2003, when this was written, and they were talking about, perhaps there'll be a new generation of emo fans and they'll form their own bands and they'll be able to female voice a wave of heartbreak songs. And again, that kind of did happen in the peak, but again, we still weren't up to scratch on inclusion.
Yeah, pretty much. I feel like my favorite quote, like you had your favorite quote earlier with like kind of encapsulated our entire episode, but my favorite quote from this whole thing was you referred to emo and like the like going to see bands play as a fantastical teenage Twilight.
Yeah.
And you're like, it was like this you can picture this sort of like moment in time nearly of, you know, going to a gig or like, you know, going into town to go see a band and it's kind of getting dark and it's kind of cold and you know that you have to stand out there in the cold and you're like, do I bring a hoodie? Do I just freeze to death so that I don't like melt inside? Or like any of the tiny shows you've seen like people play, it does kind of sum it up really nicely, this like perfect moment in that age when people needed this music. I loved that. I think that summed it up really nicely, that is kind of the roots of emo, is in this thing that is kind of magical, kind of untouchable, but still has real world implications. I guess
definitely. And I think it's beautiful as well that it's something that was so, which was I guess the core part of it then, and then it was for us, and then like even again now going into, you know, young kids finding bands and music that they really enjoy and kind of finding that fandom and just throwing themselves into it and enjoying what the artists have to say.
Yeah, I mean, fandom studies are something I'm really interested in. That's what I did my thesis on.
Do you have a degree in psychology?
I think I have a degree in psychology, actually. That's my biggest regret from episode 1 is saying that. But I did a lot of kind of delving into the roots of fandom. And I really wish I'd read this book back then, because the way fandoms were structured back then is the same as how they're structured now. It's just a different landscape. Yeah. Like there was all these like hardcore fans who were like, we go to all the shows, this is our band, we're basically in the fan club or whatever. But like at the time you could literally write to whoever and they'd write back. Yeah. And that was different to how it is now. But like I love it. I love the idea that fandom has evolved so little but so much in such a like a small space of time. But the core of it is still there. That root is still there, that it's all about like this thing that speaks to you and you discover them and they are yours and other people are just borrowing them from you.
That's it. And I definitely see that in the sense of, I was thinking I could never imagine how like an author, like let's say the two of us were like, hey, My Chemical Romance, can we come on tour with you because we want to interview you, and like just follow you around and stuff like that. Freak around, you know yourself. Never say never. But I couldn't imagine that happening, whereas it's so like I can definitely believe that he like went on tour with Dashboard Confessional, went to all those shows, but I just couldn't see that happening now.
Yeah, no, I mean there's a book coming out soon. We're gonna try like get in touch with her and talk to her about it, but I found it when I was looking just for other books on it. It's called From the Basement, A History of Emo Music and How It Changed Society. And it's from Taylor Markarian. And it's coming at the end of this year. So we're gonna see if we can talk to her about this. But it looks like she's gonna have a bunch of interviews with people that she's done herself. And like it doesn't say who these people are. And I'd be really interested to see if she did get like people like Jared or Brendan, or if she's going back further, like if you're looking at Dashboard, Brand New, The Used, Jamie Eat World, like are these the people you're talking to? So I'm really excited to see more about this. Like I think she's still writing it at the moment, which is really cool as well. So we're kind of like, what's happening?
Waiting.
Your book. But it's also, I found this while I was kind of bitching about the fact that there aren't many books on emo, so I was really glad to see that, well, no, we're still talking about it. Yeah. Emo is not dead as long as we still keep writing about it and talking about it.
That's it. And like you were saying earlier to me off pod, that this book itself kind of captures the history of, I guess, the roots and where that came from, and it's really great that we have this. And we were just thinking, oh, okay, well, how are we going to capture the history of 2007 peak emo? And I guess in a way we're doing that through this podcast.
Yeah, it's very meta.
Yeah,
how do we do
capturing
it?
history?
Well, we do it.
But I guess it's good that perhaps this book will, you know, capture that piece of peak emo history for us as well.
I think the final thing that I loved about this book is that I get the sense that he believed in some level that this was emo and that's the end of it. That whatever was going to come from it was going to be an evolution of it, but he was talking about emo as it was. Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen the video. There's like a short video of Pete Wentz talking through like a megaphone saying like emo is dead, go home, or emo's over, go home. And it was like 2005, and it's like it's just not. It's just not.
It was just getting started, I think, in 2005. Which is interesting. 2005 into 2006, you had the beginnings of Paramore, you had the beginnings of My
Like
Chem,
Boys,
like
Flick
these
of Fame.
bands that were so, you know, iconic to us as emo bands.
Yeah.
We're just
Nice.
getting started.
We are just getting started.
So that's all we have for you this week. If you'd like to find us on the interwebs, you can get us on Instagram. We're at kidsfromyesterdaypod. We're on Twitter at kidsfromyesterdaypod. We're on Tumblr as well, I believe.
Yeah, we're kidsfromyesterday.tumblr.com. We're also on emo.com. We're not. No, we have looked that up since we mentioned it earlier. We took a tiny break to check, and there's nothing there. So you can look it up all you want.
Feel free to look
Maybe
it up.
don't Google it, but you can actually go on the website.
Yeah. And
No
of course, if you do like our podcast, give us a subscribe on the Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, all your favourite places. Maybe leave us a little review. I think
be
you can
great.
I think you can like leave a 5-star, just a 5-star review with
Without
every new
writing anything.
episode.
Yeah.
And
okay.
without writing anything. So just
If you just felt like that. I mean, it's really cool. We've actually seen that we've been in like new and noteworthy for the last while. We actually got on the charts the other week, which is incredible. Like, who is listening? I mean, you guys are, but it's really wild to me that this thing that we're doing, coming to you live from a dark basement, is
people are listening.
Yeah, people are listening. So that's really cool. So if that's something that you feel like you want to do with your time, if you want to reach out to us, you can also contact us at kidsfromyesterdaypod@gmail.com if you have any thoughts. Maybe you were on emo.com. I don't know.
Yeah.
If you were ever featured on emo.com and you want to talk about your experiences there, get in touch.
Get in touch, and we will talk to you next week. Absolute lemon.
So Michael's currently editing this episode, and he has reliably informed us that a lot of the shit we said about Weezer is wrong. So to start with, Pinkerton is not Weezer's first album, the Blue Album, 1994. That is the first one. So he was like, what is wrong with you? And second of all, Clodagh, do you want to tell the people?
Okay, so I said that Green Day owned the masters. I don't think I can bring myself to say this. I said that Green Day owned the masters to Pinkerton. What the book says is that they bought the album.
So they didn't buy the masters, they went to a shop.
And they bought the album.
The way everybody else
The
did.
CD, the way everyone else did. And I just, read it and was like, oh. Because, the Green Day have money. So I was like, obviously they bought the masters. And then this whole thing with Taylor Swift. Her master's been bought recently. And that, validated in my head as, a thing that happens. So, no, they just bought the CD.
So yeah, Michael told us that he wasn't gonna finish the episode until we corrected that misinformation. So we're very sorry if you were listening and you got really mad at us for being wrong. I don't like to admit that I'm wrong, but here we are.
And here we are. We don't want Green Day getting squatters' rights on those masters either.
I mean, maybe it's an idea. Maybe Green Day should buy the masters.
Maybe they should.